Ever get lost down an internet rabbit hole? You know, you end up on one of those websites that just feels off. Like you can't find the search bar, clicking buttons does nothing.
The worst.
Makes you wonder if they've ever even met a real user, you know?
It's like they designed the site to be intentionally confusing.
And the crazy thing is, making a website work well, it's not some big secret. There's actually a whole process for figuring out what makes people tick online, and it's called A/B testing.
You're right, it's not magic.
You sent over this lecture on A/B testing, and I have to admit, at first, I thought it was just for marketing folks, but the more I read, the more I realized this is applicable to so much more.
It's one of those things that seems deceptively simple at first, but once you dig in,
Yeah.
the implications are huge.
Okay, so for our listener who maybe hasn't encountered this term before, can you give us a quick rundown? What exactly is A/B testing?
Of course. A/B testing, sometimes called split testing, is really just comparing two versions of something to see which one performs better. You can think of it like a science experiment. Instead of beakers and Bunsen burners, though, we're talking about websites, emails,
Right.
even something as small as the color of a button.
Interesting.
You show version A to one group of people and version B to another, and then you track which one gets you closer to your goal,
Yeah.
whether that's more clicks, purchases, or really whatever you're aiming for.
So instead of going with my gut on what I think is going to be the best headline for my website, for example, I can actually test it out, see what real people respond to.
Exactly. It takes out all the guesswork and replaces it with hard data.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so powerful. It's all about making those informed decisions based on how people actually behave,
Yeah.
not just what we think they'll do.
Which makes a lot more sense. We've all had those moments where we're convinced our idea is brilliant,
Oh, yeah?
and then it just totally flops.
That's true. Our intuition can be pretty tricky. By systematically testing different options, we're tapping into what really resonates with people, on a deeper level. And that's where those improved conversion rates come into play.
Right. Because at the end of the day, we don't just want people to look at stuff. We want them to actually do something. Sign up for that newsletter.
Yes,
Make a purchase.
exactly.
Spend more time on the site, whatever it may be.
And this is where things get really interesting.
Hmm.
Because, you see, A/B testing isn't some brand new marketing tactic.
Really?
Yeah, it's actually been around for ages.
Wait, really? I totally thought this was like a digital age
I
thing.
know, right? It actually has roots in agriculture, going back over a century.
What?
Yeah. Farmers were using it to compare different farming techniques.
Mm-hmm.
Things like different fertilizers or different planting methods
Oh, wow.
to see which ones yielded the best crops.
That is wild. So the same principles that we're using to optimize websites today
Mm-hmm.
were being used by farmers over 100 years ago. I love that. And speaking of surprising facts, there's this other one from the lecture that really blew my mind.
Oh, yeah.
You know how sometimes even the tiniest details can make all the difference, like how someone's apartment is decorated
Totally.
or the font they use in an email. Turns out the same thing applies online.
Oh, absolutely. Even the smallest changes can have a huge impact on how people interact with something online.
Like there's this crazy example about how Google A/B tested 41 shades of blue for their hyperlink. Apparently, they found that the perfect shade of blue led to a $200 million increase in ad revenue.
Wow.
200 million just from a slightly different blue.
That's incredible. That's the power of A/B testing in action.
Okay, I'm convinced. I definitely want to experiment with this. But before we get ahead of ourselves,
Yeah.
let's break down the actual process. Where do you even begin when you want to set up one of these A/B tests?
Well, the first step, and this is probably the most important one, is defining your goal.
Okay, so even if I'm just like testing out a new headline on my website,
Right.
I shouldn't just be like, let's see what happens.
Exactly. You need to ask yourself, what are you really trying to achieve here?
Mm-hmm.
Is it more people clicking through to the product page?
Okay.
More newsletter signups? Maybe you just want people to, spend a little bit more time on the site, really engaging with the content.
Right.
Whatever it is, having that clear objective from the get-go, that's key. It's like setting your GPS before a road trip keeps you on track.
Love that analogy. Okay, so once you know where you're headed, what's next?
So then you pick one specific element to test, just one.
Just one. Okay.
And this is where I see people get tripped up. Because they get so excited, they start changing all sorts of things on the website. But then you change
Yeah.
everything at once. How do you know what's working?
Right. If things improve, how do you know what actually made the difference?
Exactly. It muddles the results.
Okay.
Like, let's say you're testing a button on your website. You're convinced that if it was bigger and bolder, more people would click on it.
Yeah.
So you make the button bigger, you change the color, you rewrite all the text on it,
Right.
and then suddenly clicks go up.
Mhm.
But was it the size? Was it the color? Was it the text? It could have been any of those things.
Oh, that makes sense. So if I was testing out that button, I would want to maybe just change the color first
Yes.
and see what kind of impact that has?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Isolate the variable. It could be anything, a headline, an image, maybe where you've placed a form on your page.
Okay.
You name it. But you start with just one change at a time.
Focus is key. Got it. Okay, so I've picked my one tiny thing to change.
Yes.
I've got my goal in mind. Now what?
Now the fun begins.
Yeah.
We build the experiment. Remember, it's all about comparison. So you need two versions of whatever it is you're testing. Version A is your control. That's the original, the one you're already using. And version B is your variation, the one with that tiny little change.
So, sticking with our button example, version A would be my website as it is now, and version B would have that new jazzed up button color.
You got it.
Mm.
And here's where the magic happens. You don't just show everyone both versions at once.
Right.
Instead, you're going to randomly divide your audience into two groups. And, this is important, you want them to be as similar as possible. You don't want to compare, like, the shopping habits of teenagers on a Friday night
Right.
to, like, retirees browsing on a Tuesday morning.
Yeah, that wouldn't tell you very much.
It wouldn't be very helpful.
Yeah.
So you got to make sure it's a fair fight, statistically speaking.
Statistically speaking, I like that.
And don't worry, there's software that does this all for you.
Oh, good.
Yeah, you basically just tell it what your variations are.
Okay.
It takes care of the rest. Shows version A to half your audience, version B to the other half.
Nice.
All nice and randomized.
So then what? Do I just sit back and watch the numbers roll in?
Pretty much. You've launched your experiment. Now you just need to let it run for a while. This could be a few days.
Okay.
Could be a week, could be even longer. It really depends on, like, the volume of traffic you get to your site
Right.
and how much data you need to get those statistically significant results.
Statistically significant. There's that phrase again. You mentioned it earlier, and I have to admit, it always makes me think back to college statistics classes.
I hear you. It's really just about making sure that the results you're seeing, they're legit.
Right.
It's not just some random chance.
Okay.
Like if you flip a coin 5 times, you might get heads 5 times in a row.
Right.
Doesn't mean the coin is rigged, right?
Right.
But flip it like 1,000 times.
Okay.
All those random variations, they even out.
Right.
And it gives you a more accurate picture.
So statistical significance is basically saying, are my results solid enough that I can be confident in them? Okay, that makes a lot more sense. So let's say my test has run its course. I've got all this data.
Yeah.
What do I do with it? What happens next?
Now it's analysis time.
Mm.
This is where you get to see which version won.
Ooh.
Statistically speaking, of course.
Okay.
Now, it's possible version A, your original, actually outperformed your new improved version B.
Oh no, all that work for nothing.
No, not at all. Even knowing that is valuable. That's the beauty of A/B testing. It's not about being right or wrong. It's about what you learn. Knowing that your original version worked better, that's incredible.
Okay.
That means you didn't waste time and energy implementing a change that could have actually hurt you.
So even a failed test is still a learning experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But of course, the best case scenario
Yeah.
is that your variation, your version B, comes out on top,
Yes.
and it's celebration time.
Time to roll that bad boy out to everyone.
Exactly. Implement that winner. And here's the thing about A/B testing. It's not one and done. It's not like you do it once and then you're good forever. Even if you find something that works brilliantly, there's always room for improvement. There are always new things to test. It's an ongoing process.
So we're like constantly running these tests, always learning new things. That's pretty cool. But I'm wondering, is there ever a point where you can do too much testing?
It's a good question, and one I think a lot of people forget to ask. Just because we can constantly test and tweak doesn't mean we always should.
So what are some of the drawbacks? What should people watch out for?
Well, one thing to be wary of is becoming too reliant on data. It's easy to fall into this trap of thinking that if the numbers say something works, then that must be the absolute best solution. But, that kind of thinking, it can actually stifle creativity.
Because you're so focused on what you can easily measure that you might miss out on some of those bigger ideas, the ones that are harder to quantify.
Exactly. A/B testing is a fantastic tool, but it should be one of many. Don't let it become the be-all and end-all. Find a balance. Use the data to guide you, to validate those creative instincts, not to replace them entirely.
Right, so data as a guide, not a dictator. I like
Yeah.
that. Anything else we should keep in mind?
Well, it's also important to remember that just because two things happen around the same time doesn't mean that one caused the other. Correlation doesn't equal causation, as they say.
Oh, right, like that classic example. Ice cream sales go up in the summer and so do drowning deaths. But it doesn't mean that one is causing the other.
Exactly. It's just that they're both happening because it's hot out.
Right.
And the same thing can happen with A/B testing. You might see a surge in your website sales after running a test, but was it actually the test that caused it? Or was there something else going on? Maybe it's a holiday season or a competitor went out of business. It's important to think about those external factors before you go celebrating.
Don't jump to conclusions, right?
Exactly. And this kind of ties into another important point, which is that it can actually be really tricky to accurately interpret data. What looks like a clear win in one A/B test might actually be influenced by all sorts of other things.
Like, what if the people who saw version A of my website were just in a really good mood that day?
There you go.
And the people who saw version B were all stressed out and in a rush? That could totally skew things.
Absolutely. It just highlights the fact that A/B testing is an ongoing process. It's not like you run one test and you've got all the answers. You're constantly gathering data, tweaking things, refining those hypotheses. And you always have to be open to the idea that your initial assumptions might have been wrong.
So for a listener who's now like, okay, I'm sold, I want to try this whole A/B testing thing, what are some key things they should keep in mind?
I think the most important thing is to start with a clear goal. What are you hoping to achieve? Once you've got that, then you can start thinking about what you want to test and how you're going to measure success.
And don't get overzealous. Start with just one small change at a time.
Yes. Stay focused, be patient, and above all, be open to learning from every single test that you run, whether it's a smashing success or a dismal failure.
This has been so interesting. I feel like I learned so much, not just about how to actually do A/B testing, but also about approaching things with a data-informed mindset.
Me too.
It's not just about the numbers, it's about understanding people.
And that's what makes it so fascinating, figuring out what makes people tick.
That's all the time we have for today. For everyone listening, if you remember just one thing from this deep dive, let it be this. Stay curious,
Yeah.
keep experimenting, and never underestimate the power of a well-placed button.